Class of 2025, welcome back once more to our English lessons by Miss T.L.L. I see it necessary to revise typical exam line of questioning once more. Remember, with the paper 2, which is our last paper for English for the academic year 2025. Can you really believe it? So please, you don't need to mess up. You need to ensure that you do what is expected and required from your good selves to ensure that indeed we do exceptionally well in the subject. Now, guys, typical exam questions. At times, I've been reiterating this statement in our previous lessons for different genres that we have unpacked so far, that the problem with grade 12s is not that you don't have insight of the genres that you're doing at your school, but you seem not to master the skill of interpreting questions, literature questions, and responding to literature questions. So I'm simply going to give you nuggets on how to maneuver around your last paper, which is literature paper, the kind of questions that you need to expect. You must get into the examination already being familiar with the language of examination. Certain concepts should not come as a shock to your system. It must be something that you know that in this paper, this is what I'm going to be asked or required to respond to. Right, with that said, first and foremost, like I've said, it's important that you revise the genres, know characters, know the details of the plot in and out. Remember, examiners are not going to ask from the summarized version of your genres, but the deeper details of the short story. So therefore, in this paper, we are testing critical understanding of genres that you have done at your respective schools. With that said, of course, scaffolding of questions will start from your collectible marks, which are your lower order questions, followed by your middle order questions that are not really that much difficult. And of course, towards the end, we have what you call higher order questions. And it's also important to ensure that you check mark allocation so that you understand the weight of the response that is required from your good selves. Right. Now, type of question. The first question that you're going to get is match the column, right? Learners are expected to use the provided details to characterize characters. Note on each genre's question, this type of questioning may be replaced by a cloze question. These questions will not be repeated in two genres. At times, you are asked to match the columns, column A with column B. At times, you'll be given sentences where you need to fill up the missing words. And I'm expecting all of you to collect the first 4 marks. The challenge comes when you are not conversant with the flat characters. Sometimes you only concentrate on the main characters, that which your protagonists, the ones that we rely on to know are the crux of the story. And then you neglect the flat characters, those that appear at a particular scene, and we don't get to see them grow with the plot. Like Omdavi in My Children, My Africa. We only see Omdavi in that particular scene, but we don't get to see him more often. So you seem to forget flat characters, and this type of question will include both round and flat characters. So it is therefore important to ensure that you revise and remind yourself of all the characters. Now, if not, match the columns. For poetry, for example, you'll have cloze questions. Remember, now we are just dealing with lower order questions at the beginning. Learners are expected to fill in the missing words to show understanding of a scenario or structural elements. For poetry, you'll be given a sentence to test structural elements, to say what kind of a poem is this? Is this a sonnet? Is this a lyrical? Is this a ballad? Is this a free verse? So with poetry, you would need to know the structure of all the poems that you have done at your respective school. So what is important here is that on each genre, questions, this type of questioning may be replaced by match a column. So it's either you will get the one where you fill in the missing words, or you will get a match the column. You can't get both of them at the same time, right? And then with that said, in poetry, this type of question may be used to assess poetry terminology, summary of a poem, diction, vocabulary, meaning or phrase. However, Each of the latter types of questions may be asked as a standalone question for either 1 or 2 marks, depending on the extent of the question. Again, the first 4 collectible mark, right? And then with a multiple choice, you'll also expect a question around the multiple choice. You are also going to be given a distractor. A distractor will always be there. Learners must always look for the most relevant answer and check if there are any limitations to one of the choices given. And we are going to make this practical on the example that we have here on the next slide. Right, this is what we mean when we say that we have a distractor. You have characters A, B, C, D. We've got Mrs. McCartney. This is from My Children, My Africa drama. We have Mr. M, and then we have Tamim Bikwana. You have Isabel Dyson. Now, we've got 4 characters, but then we've got 5 descriptors, meaning that one of them is a distractor. What do you mean by a distractor? An answer that is slightly, almost nearer to the one that is needed. So you must be sure, don't just guess. And of course, Mrs. McCartney, you know what I mean. Mr. M, Tammy, Isabel, these are the main characters, because we rely on them to know the crux, if not the main, to explore the main themes of My Children, My Africa. But yet we have a flat character. You see what I mean when I say that you need to master all the and know all the characters. We've got Mrs. McCartney, who is a flat character, right? Now, with that said, it means we start with our flat character here, Mrs. McCartney. Of course, the correct answer is C. He's a fed cook seller. Don't forget that, please. And then Mr. M, you need to check, organizes a debate competition. Of course, he's the one who organized the debate competition. Tamim Bikwana abandons the literature quiz, and we know that at the end of the day, Tammy is going to abandon the literature quiz to join the boycotts. And then of course Isabel, it will be she's the one who wins the debate competition in Act 1 Scene 1. So it's also important, I will reinforce and reiterate that you need to collect the first 4. Or alternatively, if you're not given match the column in poetry, you may be given a sentence that will test either analysis, an in-depth analysis of the poem, structural elements of the poem. Then you have to provide or select appropriate words to complete the sentences. Right. Okay. Right. One of the distractors again that we spoke about, at times you'll be given a multiple choice. In our short story, The Wind and the Boy, would say that Friedman turned from in his second phase in a graceful gazelle in line 3 in his third phrase. Ne? Now the question would be then, choose the correct answer to complete the following sentence. Write only A to D to the next number 5.3. In the answer book, Friedman turned from so the correct one, it should be what? A toddler. Then the distractor here is a newborn, is a teenager. So you see how you tend to lose the what in English we call them the low hanging fruits, which are collectible marks. So you tend to lose them because examiners will always give you distractors. Something closer to a toddler, some will just rush to say teenager, some will just rush to say newborn. These are just distractors. Something similar or slightly relative to the correct answer. So please be sure that you collect, you provide the appropriate responses. So learners at this point in time, they must be exposed to a variety of characters, like I've said, and I'm just going to play a short video here that will test your knowledge on My Children, My Africa, again in terms of characters. correct. And that was just an example of literature quiz that can also assist you to further remind yourselves on how on understanding characters and the role that they played in either your drama or your short story. So please know all the characters. Remember, characters are the backbone of the story. Without them, there's no story. Now, another question, typical exam question, is terminology or meaning of words or phrases. The meaning of the words must be explained in context, not as an isolated concept, especially in poetry. To say, go to line 1, what does the poet means by using the word introvert? You are not going to explain the word introvert as a literal meaning from a dictionary. You need to explain that the poet refers to himself as that. So that is what we mean by context. So the definition is not the one that we typically get from a dictionary, which is a literal meaning, but a contextualized definition, to say in the context of the story, or in this context of the poem, this is what the word means. All right. So you must also be mindful and expect questions of this nature. Right. Another example we have here, explaining in the poem Hard to Find. This is what we mean when you speak about terminology type of question. Explain the meaning of they fly out. And then again, what is meant by we are provoked, right? So here, remember, the poem Hard to Find is about the writer's blurting out words when she is clouded with emotions. So you see the definition, I'm taking it back to the context. So when you say that when we are provoked, what does that mean in the context of the poem, not as a literal meaning? All right? And then from that, you must also expect questions around literal or figurative meaning. Learner has to state whether the speaker or characters or narrator's words have been used figuratively or literal, bearing in mind that literal meaning are words or phrases which are with original basic meaning. Then figurative meaning will be words and phrases used not with their basic meaning, but with a more imaginative meaning in order to create a special effect. And then with that said, that is when we see, or we get to outline figurative figures of speech embedded in the character's words. Then you know that it's figurative. The woman is beautiful. That is a basic meaning, which means that it becomes how literal. But I say this woman is a rose. I have compared this woman to a rose. So it's no longer basic, but it becomes figurative. So in grade 12, you must be in a position to distinguish between literal and figurative meaning. And of course, you must expect questions around the distinction between literal meaning versus a figurative meaning. Now, figurative meaning explanation. This is how you need to maneuver around the question. A figuratively used word or phrase being explained by giving the hidden meaning thereof. I'm still going to explain this further because I think we must agree, grade 12, this is where you struggle to identify figures of speech and to explain their relevance. At times, it becomes easier for your good selves to identify the figure of speech, but where you seem to stumble is when you now need to explain the effectiveness, if not the relevance of that particular figure of speech. So learners must state the evident figure of speech there, whether is it a metaphor, whether is it a simile, whether is it allusion, whether is it irony, whether is it a paradox, antithesis, and hyperbole. The list is endless. I believe by now we all know the figures of speech. So I normally say, to maneuver around this question, simplify it for yourself. Check if whether the figure of speech is there for comparison purposes. Check if not, is it there as a sound, or alternatively is there for contradiction purposes, like your irony. And then when now you have to come up with the relevance, it will be easier if you have first established, are we comparing here, so that when it comes to relevance, now you are telling us the two things that are being compared and the reason for that comparison. If it's a sound, then you must explain the impact or the effectiveness of sound in that particular line. If it's a contradiction, we must know what contradicts what. Then that's how you explain the relevance. So where you go wrong, most of you, is that when you are asked to explain the relevance, you give us the definition of the figure of speech. Remember, we know the definitions. What we are testing is your critical analysis skill on how you are able to cipher meaning from the implied meaning rather, from, or embedded meaning, let me put it that way, from the use of that particular figure of speech. The figure of speech, by highlighting key aspects in context, for example, in a simile or metaphor, state two compared things, exactly like I've just said. Say what is common between the two and conclude by indicating what is achieved by comparing the two. Let's use basic example. I say this man is a giraffe. I've used a direct comparison that automatically is what is a metaphor. Now the relevance will say the man is compared to a giraffe, and a giraffe is a tall animal. Therefore the comparison was used to highlight the height of a man. You see, that is how you justify the relevance of the figure of speech used. Hence I say, where you need to start is to establish, is this sound, is this contradiction, or is it comparison, or again, is it personification? If it's personification, tell us what is being added human quality and what was the purpose of adding a human quality to that particular non-living thing. What is that the writer is trying to convey or to explore by adding a human quality to a non-living thing? Don't give us a definition, right? They may be used pardon me, on sound devices. Like I've said, we've got alliteration like onomatopoeia. They may be used to highlight the meaning contained as part where the sound device is used. Likewise, the relevance would become evident when the learner explains how the use of the literary sound device achieves the desired goal, to say what is the sound is trying to highlight or show in the particular poem, or maybe in a story. Right. Now here's another example where you would say figuratively, then you say the words are uttered quickly without any thought, consideration, or uncontrollably. Or you can say again in The Wind and the Boy, there was an example of a simile, and then when you justify it, you will say just as a cobra's, because remember simile is a comparison, just as a cobra's movement before it attacks signals danger, so do Friedman's movement indicate that. Remember, Friedman's movement here was compared to that of a cobra. So we want to establish what is the similarity between the cobra's movement and Friedman's movement, so that we achieve the relevance of a simile here. So just as a cobra's movement before it attacks signals danger, so do Friedman's movement indicate that he's about to commit his naughty act, while will have a huge impact. So this is how you justify the relevance of the use of figures of speech. I hope it makes sense. Right, again, grade 12's setting description, very important. You must give both time and place of the question's point of reference. And normally, this will be deduced from an extract. So when you are given an extract, you are not going to rush to the questions. You read the extract, you establish who is involved in terms of characters, where they are in terms of place, and what is happening. Then it will give you what? Time. Okay? We are going to do it practically. Stage direction. Grade 12, again, these are low-hanging fruits. I don't understand why you fail the question of stage directions for those of you who are doing a drama. Remember, this question is only applicable for drama, right? Focus on what the character would say without using words or action. The action described must correlate with the character's tone, as informed by the situation in which he or she finds himself or herself. Then the note here says 2 different actions must be stated for 2 marks. So you must check your mark allocation. If it's 2 marks, it means that we need description of body language and facial expression. If it's 1 mark, you may just describe 1. Okay, but remember, your description must match the context of what the character is saying. Now, let's take an example and look into how to respond to questions of time and place. Sometimes, remember, the question may be coined differently. The examiners may say, describe the setting. It's still the same as describe time and place. Be cognizant or be mindful of the fact that it does not say state the setting. Hence, mark allocation is 2. So, you need a mark for time, you need a mark for place. Now, in the poem The Slave Dealer, from the ocean's wave a wanderer came, with visage tanned and done. His mother, when he told his name, scarce knew her long-lost son. So altered was his face and frame by the ill course he had run. It says, from ocean's wave. So, this take place after the slave dealer's return from his aimless travel. Now this gives us what? Time. And then place to his mother's home. So this question, you give us the events that are happening and the place where the characters are. Simple as it is. Alright? Right, now we are going to get into your middle order to your higher order questions. Now, grade 12s, you'll be asked recalling information from the storyline. Know each of the genre in detail by reading and revising over and over again. Learners must remember finer details of the literary genre. Even if you are given an extract, it does not mean all the questions are going to be deduced from the extract. Yes, some of the questions, of course, you'll get them directly from the extract, but your higher order question will test an overall understanding of that particular genre. And at times, you'll be asked to make a statement true. Use understanding of types of sentences on how to identify main clauses in sentences to correctly identify the focal point of statement to be proven as being false. This is not a language question, it's a literature question. So the falseness or versus the truthfulness must be proven by evidence from the literary set work. Remember, everything that you say in literature must be backed up with evidence. I've repeated this over and over again during our contextual questions lessons. Now, this is, I think, 2024 question paper. It was a short story from The Wind and the Boy. And the question of making the statement true, sometimes they can say state why this following sentence is false. So it can be coined differently. You must be mindful of it. At times, examiners would say change one word to make the following statement true or explain why the statement is false. So you need to navigate on around this question based on how it is asked. It says Renee is Isabel's sister. Then they say change one word to make the following statement true. John Kumalo is a carpenter who turned a pastor. Note, change one word does not mean write one word. Right? So you must change only one word. Don't write that one word. Write the entire sentence and change one word to make that following statement true. Now let's get to the most complex type, paper 2 typical type, paper 2 typical exam questions rather, pardon me for that. Now let's get to the most complex, but I can simplify them for you, don't worry. Characters or the speaker's state of mind. Now here, that's where you get major challenges. And it is because of poor vocabulary, I must tell you, my kids. At times, you are limited by vocabulary. Right? I'll say you need to use a descriptive word to identify the state of mind and then elaborate on why the character or the speaker's state of mind is in that way. And a descriptive word, we are speaking about adjectives, the correct adjective. And again, taking into cognizance the context. Put yourself inside the shoes of the character, not literally but figuratively. Try to think what can be the closest feeling of what the character may feel depending on what the character has gone through. Then you come up with one descriptive word to be the state of mind, and you should be in a position to explain why the character is in that particular outlined or described state of mind. I hope it makes sense, right? The state of mind is usually linked to the character's or the speaker's feelings at that instance. However, the answer to this type of question must be restricted to state of thinking of a character or a speaker. And then one of the complex question, middle to higher order question, discuss. Once you see the word discuss, grade 12s, learn to answer in full. Please don't be lazy. Write in full. Discuss what line or extract reveal about a character's character trait. Remember, we have what you call character and characterization, right? So based on how the character may convey or use words to convey his ideas or emotions, just from that line, we make a judgment to say what this line reveals about the character. Now, you use different parts of the novels, drama, short stories, or poems to deduce characterization. As evident as at whatever cited part of the literary set work, learners need to be aware that in that instance, you may need to consider other incidents in this plot that relate to the part in one way or the other. However, the character trait to be highlighted must be the one exclusively evident at that cited part of the storyline. Remember, if you say that in My Children, My Africa, that Isabel is brave, you must have by confronting Mr. M to say that she needs to be stop being a teacher every time, and I give Tammy space to also voice out. And then the examiner say, what does that line reveal about Isabel? Your response must be 100% based particularly on that line. However, you must also have a base to say, if you say Isabel is brave, you must have a base in the sense that you have evidence from the plot or from the storyline to support that kind of description. Remember, everything that we say in literature must be backed up indeed with what? Evidence. Irony. Well, both sides of the irony would not display any understanding of the irony. Note, the one side of the irony will be identifiable on the question point of reference. However, the second part of the irony will not be identified from the elsewhere in the extract, novel, or short story. Example, verbal irony, when character says one thing but they mean the opposite. Situation irony, when the opposite of what is expected happens. Dramatic irony, when the audience or reader knows something that a character or characters have done or does not know. Generally, irony is about contrast, which means contradiction between what is expected and what actually happens. So, again, I don't understand why you fail the question of irony, because the first part of the answer, it's in the question itself. You must just give us the opposite, right? And you must establish, is it a verbal irony? Is it a situational irony where something transpired it's said to happen in the story, but the opposite of what was expected to happen happened? So, this is how you respond to question of irony. Both sides of the irony must be there in your answer. So, it simply means grade 12, you must master the art and the skill of writing in full and substantiating your answers. Now, these are your last questions, which are questions of themes. A discussion of theme provided in the question may be done in one of the following ways. You can state 3 incidents that serve as evidence of the theme from the storyline. Or alternatively, you can state one instance that explore that theme and fully discuss it. Again, you can state 2 points that serve as evidence of that theme. Discuss one of them briefly and leave the other one not discussed. That's what you call also the P method strategy. The first P, it's when you make a point. E, you support it with evidence. You explain the evidence and then you link everything together. Opinion on characters. For an example, to say Tammy in My Children, My Africa is an admirable character. Even though the learner opinion is required. It must be supported by details from the novel or all the genres that you are doing. I've always said this, guys, even if you are asked opinion-based type of questions, it does not mean now you have a room to think as you want and use general statements. Mr. M is a good character. If you feel that you are of the view that Mr. M is not a good character, it's not based on your personal perception. You must have evidence from the plot or from the drama itself to support your ideas. So when you are asked to discuss either particular theme, you use evidence from the story to support that. That is what we speak about context. So avoid general statements, avoid the use of pronouns, rather speak about characters so that you learn to contextualize your responses. Now, with that said, it means that there is no right or wrong opinion here. It is the substantiation given that is awarded marks. Remember, in grade 12, you are not going to get a mark for either saying yes or no. We are interested in your reasoning. And I've always said that if you learn to answer in full, you fully substantiate, borrowing and deducing evidence from the plot, there's no way that you can struggle to collect marks in the open-ended questions of literature. A discussion of the learner's opinion may be done in one of the following ways. You state 3 incidents that have evidence of the opinion from the storyline. For an example, Isabel is an admirable character. One, you can say yes, even though she's a white a girl, she was brave enough to go into a black community to start the debate. She fostered a relationship with Tammy, and she's welcoming to both Tammy and Mr. M. She even went to a point of inviting them to for supper at their house. She's very sympathetic. You see, there's quite a plethora of evidence from the from My Children, My Africa to support that opinion, to say, yes, indeed, she's an admirable character. So don't become too personal and end up now using personal perceptions deviating from the context of the genre, right? Now, the tips is that you can state 3 incidents that have evidence, like I've just said now. You can state 1 instance that explores that opinion and fully discuss it. You see, fully discuss it. So there's no way that you can write or respond to discussion questions with only 1 sentence. You need to have beefed up, rich answers for you to collect the 3 marks. And it's actually easy. It's not difficult. State 2 points that serve as evidence of that opinion. Discuss 1 theme briefly and leave other one not discussed. Note the PIL strategy may be used to present a fully discussed response. And then for open-ended, the discussion must be restricted to the question's point of reference. Evidence from elsewhere in the storyline, poem, as well as that from general knowledge must not be used to answer this type of questions. When marking, practice global marking. Okay, this 1 point is for educators, it's not for you guys. And once more, good luck. Happy marking is not for you, but I want you to read this. Literature is a human apocalypse. The word apocalypse meaning that it's a revelation, the destruction of the world or any catastrophic event, but mostly a revelation of man's revelation to man. And criticism rather is not a body of adjudication, but the awareness of the revelation, the last judgment of mankind. And this is a quote that is borrowed to further give us an in-depth analogy of what literature is. Grade 12s, I hope this will help you to navigate your last paper, and please practice question interpretation. Don't be in a hurry to respond. Underline the key concepts from each question so that when you come up with answers, you are able to address the key concept of the question. Once more, thank you and good luck.